Welcome to another episode of the A.R. Bernard Show. I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. We're excited to bring you today's guest, of course. She is a New York Times best-selling author, a two-time Emmy Award winner, and anchor for both ABC News Live, Prime, and World News Tonight on Sundays. Please welcome the extraordinary Linsey Davis.
Extraordinary. I think that's the first time I got that adjective. Thank you so much for having me, Pastor.
And thank you for making the time to be a part of the program here. I'd like to start, because, this program is about the intersection of faith and culture. And it explores how we apply our faith to the realities of culture. And I think of culture as, beliefs, traditions, ideas, institutions, language, customs that constitute the life of a people here. For us, our context is America and American society. And you've had to, as a journalist, be quite astute when it comes to understanding our society, especially in the realm of politics. But I'd like to start with something that I noticed on your website, and that is, I am a Christian. And I said, boy, she's unapologetically Christian. And I like that because, we're being marginalized in American society right now. Also, in one of the books, children's books that you wrote, it said from a Christian worldview. Let's begin there. What is a Christian worldview?
I think that one of the, commandments is love your neighbor as yourself, right? And so that particular book that you're talking about, One Big Heart, that really was the point. It was kind of twofold. It was about that we are more alike than we are different as far as when it comes to, gender, race, religion. And that was an important message that I really wanted to impart to my son at the time, who had been talking about race at an early age because I felt like it was an extremely divisive time in our country. Not that we're ever in a time that, everybody is, holding hands in kumbaya, but it was right after, if you remember, the two black men who were arrested at the Starbucks in Philadelphia for trying to use the bathroom. They hadn't paid for anything. And, a promo came on for the noon news. And my son was doing Legos, and I really didn't think he was paying attention. And he said to me, a few minutes later, are Daddy and I going to get arrested if we go to Starbucks? And I thought, oh my gosh, it's so heavy. What an albatross to have around his neck so early.
Yeah.
I think he was maybe 4 years old at the time. And that he was processing it and talking about race and identifying as a black male in our society. And that really was kind of heartbreaking in that moment. And in that moment, I got my next idea for my book. And so One Big Heart was really about loving each other, loving ourselves, and God's love for us. So it was really kind of threefold, but the obvious theme there is love. And I'm mindful in this moment of, I just was talking with Savannah Guthrie of the Today Show, and she has a book out that's called Mostly What God Does Is Love Us. And that's what I guess I have just felt overwhelmed really by from a child, is that God has his fingerprints all over my life. And it's kind of like we talk about in church, like I said I wasn't going to tell anybody, but I just couldn't keep it to myself.
Yeah.
And that's how the more I have lived, the more I have just been in awe of God's love for me and the necessity for me to share that. I have felt like, in a way, I owed it to God. Not that we can repay him, but it's kind of like the idea of, had I 10,000 tongues, I couldn't thank him enough. And so I felt multiple reasons why I wanted to get into writing children's books. but I felt I wanted to kind of write this love letter in my first book, a love letter to God, just of my gratitude. Just I had to do something.
Yeah.
And so I'm taking a long way to get back to your original question, but that Christian view, I think, is love. It all comes down to love.
Jesus was asked, out of the 613 commandments, how do you summarize it? Which one is most important? Mm-hmm. And he said, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love neighbor as self. So central to those two commandments is love. He said, on these two hang all the law and the prophets. So for you, Christian worldview is seeing life and people through the lens of love.
Of love.
How do you define that, love?
That's a hard question. Wow, it's funny because I always do the questions. I ask the questions, So it's fun. It's fun to be in this seat and to answer. How do I define that? Well, the first thing I think of that comes to mind is that God loved us so much that He gave His only begotten Son. But I think about how much God has blessed me personally, and how I am always trying to give that back in some way. And as the Bible tells us that, by giving to the least of these is the way that we can show our love right back to Him. And so that's just, I'm always mindful of that. I feel like I try and give financially. I try and give of my time. I do an annual Christmas benefit where I know that these acts won't do it, right? But that's just where my heart is, that I have to put it out there, and that is my way of trying to just show my appreciation, that just how loved I am, even though I don't deserve it.
Well, you are in the heart of Protestant theology that says we don't get saved by works, but we work because we're saved.
Right, exactly.
So it's because of this relationship with God, and I love the word gratitude, we are compelled to make a difference. We have a Judeo-Christian faith, which simply means that our Christianity is rooted in Judaism. And in Judaism, there's a term called tikkun olam. And it simply means repairing the world. That every one of us have a responsibility to use our gift, talents, and abilities to make a difference. To say we were here in a significant way because we made the world better.
Yes.
Which means when we come into it, there's a problem.
Right.
There are issues. But the grand narrative of Christianity is just that: creation, fall, redemption, restoration. So love is about redeeming the good that we can find in people and within society, and being compelled to do that, which you express it in the things that you do. I love how firm you are in terms of your Christian faith and your embracing of the Christian grand narrative in a pluralistic society that we live in America, and becoming more religiously pluralistic.
Yes.
How do you interact with other faiths?
I have only ever attended, for me, growing up in my childhood, I grew up in an AME church. Then when I was in college, I chose to go to a Baptist church. And now my family, raising my son in a Baptist church. I have had the opportunity to worship with other faiths just through work, really. Just attending, temple, or just reading a little bit of the Quran, reading a little bit of the Torah, to get an understanding of the intersectionality.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot, again, going back to that book subtitle, we have a lot more in common than we do that separates us. But what I have found is adults separate. Adults focus on where things are different. Kids focus on where things are the same, where people are the same. Like I've often thought about, and having a son has really helped me see the world with new eyes. And he would come home when, 5, 6 from summer camp, first day, just met new kids. And he would never say what race they were, what religion they were. He would only talk about, he likes Legos too. He loves Star Wars too. This is my new friend. My new friend. Just known this person like 3 hours, right? But they're my friend. And all the things that they have in common is what he would talk about. And I think that it's more of when we get older that we get kind of tarnished by but we don't want to be friends with that person because they're different, right? You don't even get a chance to know them. You don't even get a chance to see if there could be a friendship because there's some difference. And so that's why I feel like as adults, we have to see with better eyes than that. And that's why it's also interesting with regard to writing children's books that I'm almost just reinforcing concepts that they already know to be true. And really, I'm kind of trying to plant the seed in the parents who are perhaps reading the books to get back to the basics. And so I have been actually pleasantly surprised at when I have gone to visit, other faiths, that there's so much that we just are in sync with, that we believe. The roads part ways, but then they come back together as well. And that's something that I think is unfortunate, that when we talk about the wars and the deaths, I think it's religion has been at the heart of, primarily the heartache and the pain that we have suffered over the centuries.
I'm going to push back. Is it religion or how people are using religion?
Sure. It's man's perception of religion.
Because you just spoke of a commonality, shared values.
Yes.
And I'm getting the impression that your exposure has been primarily to the Abrahamic faiths.
Yes.
Right. But religion brings a moral value consensus that's necessary for justice and concord. Now, what we do with it, because there's a wonderful passage that says, woe to those who use the word of God deceitfully. And it's true. We can take religion and use it to oppress people of color, like part of American history and American experience. And we buy into the social construct, of superiority and inferiority when it comes to one color of another. I had to decidedly be black because my father was white, my mother was black, and
but the world saw you as black.
And that's just it. I came into this, this space where there was quite a bit of tension because I came to the United States. I was born in Panama. Came here in 1957, but I grew up in the 60s. And every revolution imaginable was going on in the United States, especially in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, where I grew up. And I was part of the busing program. So I was out in white schools, making white friends, But I had to decidedly take on that identity because I was too light to be black and too dark to be white. And I think I'm speaking to someone who knows what I'm talking about. So I understood that it was an identity that saw the world through a particular lens that was shaped, informed, influenced by what was happening in American culture at the time. And, it forced me to look at religion in terms of how it was used, because I became a member of the Nation of Islam, and I got involved in social activism, and Malcolm was our hero, not Dr. King. I learned to appreciate him later on. But I understood throughout history that religion was used and misused, when essentially it was to bring out the best in us and redeem humanity. But how we apply that.
Yes.
And I'm fascinated whenever I speak to someone of your caliber and your experience, especially in journalism, because the journalists of the New Testament were the scribes. They were responsible for interpreting, and you and I had a little bit of a conversation about this before we went on air. They were responsible for interpreting Scripture, but also interpreting the events of the time through the lens of Scripture.
Yes.
And there's a passage that's found in the book of the prophet Isaiah, and it says, because of lying and falsehood and deceit, justice can't enter because truth is fallen in the street. Therefore, righteousness and equity can't enter. As a journalist, we're in a world where there's a lot of intentional misinformation and disinformation.
Yes.
What are the rules now in terms of communicating the facts?
Well, I think that people often focus on it like it's new. I think that it has, there is a heightened, perhaps, we're at a heightened point of misinformation perhaps in this time. But I'm thinking of just in that we've celebrated Easter recently. And if you go back to the idea of the guards after the stone had been rolled away, and they were like, oh man, we can't tell the people what just happened here, right? This is going to be a problem if they know the truth. And so you think about that misinformation at that time, which was significant, right? And as we see a repetition of these retellings of recreations of the acts of the day, even January 6th, for example, there are people who witnessed it, who some were like, oh, this was just like any other day of tourists going through the Capitol, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. There's some video that suggests otherwise. But I'm reminded of that story in the Bible because this is nothing new. And it is almost a political, it was then a political faction really that was like, oh, the people cannot know this. And I think that I'm reminded of that, and it smacks of in many scenarios what we see today. I think that there is a louder, megaphone now to say, oh, you can't trust the news. You can't trust the media. And then there are people who want to believe that. And that's certainly unfortunate. There are a lot of statistics and there's a lot of research and data that suggests that in general, people on the left and people on the right really actually want to just be reaffirmed in whatever it is they already believe. They don't necessarily want to hear a counter argument, a different narrative from what they already believe. They want it to just be more of the same of what I already believe. I want that to be confirmed in what I see. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate on both sides. And that's what I would like to say is where we come in what I'd still like to believe mainstream media for us on ABC and some of our other competition as well. I would say that they still do a good job of trying to just the facts, ma'am, just straight, give it to you straight without the adjectives. But no matter what, if you're not giving people what they want to hear, then, oh, you're just part of the liberal media, or, you can't be trusted. And one thing that I think is really unfortunate as well is you add to that artificial intelligence, which then there are certain things that you can manipulate and voices and people's faces that, we can make, pastor say something that he didn't say at all, right? There was a conversation I was having, an interview that I was doing the other day with an evangelist, and at some point I had said something that it was a pre-recorded thing, and I said to the producer, I said, maybe we should edit my question, maybe we should take my question out altogether, because somebody can edit it actually for me to sound like I just said, oh, I don't support abortion, or I support abortion, whatever it is, they will just cut that one thing, because I actually had led into it by saying something like, well, what about the person who says, I don't support abortion? That somebody will just edit it to then have Linsey say this. And that is unfortunate because, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, I wouldn't have even thought of that. I would have just played to that and gone with it. But now I have to double check, triple check myself to make sure that I can't be edited in such a way, because I don't feel like there was that appetite as much to do that even just a handful of years ago. That it is concerning that perhaps it is being more amplified, this concept of misinformation.
You've given me a few sermons already, so this is good preaching, by the way. Because I have to think about being in your shoes. The role of the journalist is to report the news. But can they report the news free of commentary, perspective, and how much of that perspective is shaped and influenced by their own leanings, whether politically, morally, socially?
I think it certainly can be done, and I'm even sometimes wincing a little bit at what I see, even when I don't think that there is an intent to color the perspective. But as a big story that now is Donald Trump being in court, and I've heard people characterize him as, oh, he was angry, he was seething, you could see it. Now, could you? Because maybe if he pounded the table, you could say that, right? But if he wasn't doing that, was he really angry? And can we know? So I think that our own biases can then change the narrative of what we think we see. So I'm very careful. I try to be very careful to just say what was I observed that can't be denied or disputed. So if someone were to pound the table, I would just say to that, they pounded the table. I wouldn't then say, about their temperament and how they were feeling, because we can't really know how someone was feeling. And so I would say, in a hyper state of being really vigilant for myself and how I observe and therefore interpret and therefore relay to our viewers.
But you are expressing the fact that you have a moral compass. You work within a certain framework. That's not true of all journalists. And I have to ask the question, how much pressure is on you by maybe, as a journalist, by maybe the platform that you speak from, the people who own that platform, how much pressure is on you to have to give it from a certain angle or a particular leaning?
I don't feel that pressure externally. I feel it internally.
Okay.
I have to say, our bosses are the point is just give them straightforward news, facts, honesty. I don't feel, if there is in the atmosphere, I don't feel maybe we should say X. I don't feel that, but I internally do feel a lot of pressure to get it right and to be beyond reproach, even though that's difficult to do. Especially when someone wants to believe. Again, they already have this preconceived notion that, oh, Linsey is, if I ever, and maybe I'll do a twice a year search on Twitter just to be like, oh, what do people say about that? How did people respond? And it'll, people say, I knew Linsey was, a Trump supporter. I knew Linsey was for Biden. It's just on any given day, however I have delivered a story, you're going to have people on both sides who are, making their decisions about I was too left, I was too right, and I'm thinking I was down the middle, right? And so that's where, perception certainly becomes reality, people's own realities. They go in with what they want to believe. So I do have this heightened awareness where I'm thinking, just the facts, ma'am.
But the platform that you're on has to allow that.
Yes.
I mean, because some networks, I go from network to network to network to network to get some commonality.
Yeah. And know what everybody's saying.
If they're all saying the same thing, then
yeah.
that's true. I can bank on that one. But where they're all disagreeing, I don't know. I've got to sort through that.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that I've got to go to several networks and hear their side of the story to try to get to the truth.
Right.
Because you're immediately identified with that network.
Yes.
So if Linsey was on network,
yes,
XYZ, network X and network Y, all right, immediately you're considered either right wing or left wing.
Yes.
And you have to sort through that as well, correct?
Yes. Well, and I think that the cable news outlets do almost wear it as a badge of honor that, we are left. Yeah. Yes, we are right. And I want to think that it's a little different with network news. Though, again, we can't talk about them as a monolith. That there are certain people who carry in, as you say, their own biases that might tilt, in or lean in one particular direction. But I can just, as for me in my house, I can only kind of really focus for myself how I'm coming across.
I want to circle back to something you were talking about in the beginning of our conversation, where you said that your son inspired you to look at these things through the lens of a child. I have to think about Jesus' words to his disciples: unless you become converted, unless you become a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And you're saying that it's when we become adults that we buy into social constructs, we end up engaging in confirmation bias. But that child doesn't see all of these distinctions that we embrace, unfortunately, as we're adults. That's powerful.
I look at it even from we've been talking a lot about the people aspect of it, but even in my first book, The World is Awake, I started thinking about my son in terms of when I might look out of the window and see a bunch of snow and think, it's going to take a long time to get to work today. Oh, the traffic. I'm immediately thinking about it in a pessimistic way. And one particular day, my son was standing outside with his little mitt. He's like, look at the snowflakes. And the snowflakes were just kind of staying on his glove in a way that you could see the design. And he was just blown away by the intricacy of each snowflake. And we started talking about how, no snowflake is alike, and just the wonder in all of that, And so then I started just taking the time to then focus on the beauty of the snow or the excitement or the wonder he would feel in seeing a rainbow, or, sometimes when God just paints these unbelievable sunsets across the canvas that almost glow in an orange aura, and he would take it in and pause and watch, or butterfly, just things that I had stopped seeing.
Yeah.
That he was looking at in awe, and that was then. I mean, he had actually asked me, which I was blown away by. When he was maybe 2.5, and I was driving him somewhere, and he just said, "Mom, does God open up the flowers?" And that was what sparked my first book, because I knew I wanted to write a children's book. I just didn't know what I wanted to write about, and so each time he really was my muse, and would without realizing it, give me these ideas for, that's my next book. And when I look back at my own childhood and what wasn't so overtly spoken, but we were that church. I was going to Sunday school. I was singing on the church choir. I went to YPD, which is the Young People's Division, and, you know, doing the announcements, doing the welcome of visitors. And there's so much now that I look back and just find how rich it was, in that even now when I'm, you know, doing public speaking, my first foray into that was as a child in the podium, in a microphone, at a podium in the pulpit. And I think about how that gave me my introduction into public speaking was the church. But the most important thing is my parents gave me this foundation of faith. And so when I started writing books, I knew that I wanted to be able to give a foundation of faith in my children's books, primarily in a selfish way to my son. I felt it was important to plant those seeds really early. But I felt that there had to be enough like-minded parents out there who were going to value and appreciate that and want that, you know, for their children as well. But yes, my son has inadvertently been my muse and inspired many of my books.
Well, I love the fact that you point to the awe, the wonder that creation should inspire us to experience. The heavens declare the glory of God, the Scripture says. The firmament shows his handiwork, right? And I can go on with that. Day unto day are the speech, right? Night unto night others' knowledge. And it's easy to get away from that. We can get so caught up in, you know, this world in which we live and the tensions. And it just brought you back to that. So, I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children's books.
This is
what
my
are we
sixth.
Up to?
Girls
this
of the
is
World
6?
is number 6. Yes.
Okay. So when I looked, I said, "Wow, children's books." She's a journalist. She's interviewed some very public, high-profile individuals, and she's writing children's books. Did you give up on the adults?
Very funny. There are a number of answers really to that question. One, you know, I had this passion that was born out of me having my own son, and then having a desire, because I do consider myself to be a storyteller. And when I started really thinking about what I do and the toll that it has to really take when you're talking about, you know, death and destruction, mayhem and murder, missing people. And that I really didn't even want my son, when he was young, would want to watch me on the news. And I was saying to my husband, like, don't let him watch this stuff, you know, it's just too heavy. And so with writing books, there was an aspect of it that I could tell, and again, because I had this idea that I wanted to be faith-based, all my books to be faith-based, that I could tell the good news in the most literal and figurative way. Talk about the good news of Christ. But I also wanted something that my son could be able to share unabridged. You know, that I didn't have to worry about, is this going to be bad for him? That I could share Mommy's work, you know, with him directly and feel proud of that. And so it's funny. I'm trying to think, have I given up on the adults? I mean, I want to believe that when, you know, people talk about, you know, the children are our future, it's not just a cliche thing. Yeah. I mean, it's really true. And so I guess I won't say I've given up on adults, but I'll say it like this, Pastor, that my focus has shifted. And my focus is on the children and planting the seeds of this youngest generation among us.
But we're just talking about how your son, Aiden, inspired you. So maybe by targeting the children,
Yes, you target the adults in turn.
Exactly.
You're right. You're
I think
right.
Your strategy is brilliant.
Yes, you're on to something. I'm going to claim that as my whole plan from the beginning.
That was it all along,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Let's talk about Shelley Lynn
Oh, yes.
Thornton,
Yeah.
right? Also known as Baby Roe, the daughter of Jane Roe.
Mm-hmm.
How do you cover a story like that and remain objective?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a very, very hot button issue, especially now. And we're in an election cycle that's front and center.
There was an executive producer who I worked with early on in my career, and I would pitch all these story ideas to get onto Nightline. And after a while, she, kind of pulled me aside and said, "You're pitching topics and subject matters, but characters are the vehicles to tell the larger story. You've got to pitch people." I hadn't thought about that. It was like, oh, that's why for years this whole thing, my strategy was wrong here. So when I look at that with regard to, Baby Roe, it's not about, for me, when I'm sitting down with her, the subject matter. It's about her story as a person. And just understanding how she's at the center of this lightning rod issue without even the awareness of it for a long time. And so it's really just about getting her story. It's not about the bigger story. It's just about her. And I actually found her to be a really interesting interview because of her lack of awareness about her role in this ruling that it has so many people grappling. I mean, it really might be the issue, one of certainly, but maybe the issue that changes the direction and outcome of this upcoming presidential election. She's at the center of this without the awareness of it, and it's just so fascinating to me. But so really, I just went into it talking about her childhood, talking about when she realized, what her mom told her, she had been adopted, so she didn't know until way down the road in her life, her role in history. And so it was just about getting at the questions of her personal story.
It's amazing how you can become a key player in history and not know it. And I love the fact that you decided to focus on her, the person, and how this is all impacting her. And you don't have to take the next step to take a political position on it, but bring to light how this is affecting her.
And I might add, at the outset, she actually had said, "I don't want to talk about my feeling on abortion," which we respected. Didn't ask, didn't tell. And we moved on with just getting, again, at just her own life.
What would you say is the most impactful story that you've ever done? And why?
You're asking me to pick my favorite child. Impact, I think, can come in different ways. There can be the impact that it had on me. There can be the impact that it had on a law or someone else's life.
Yeah.
So I think I would put it in a lot of different some different headings of what, because immediately maybe like 5 stories came to mind.
Okay.
And so in no particular order, I would tell you about a man by the name of Mayan Burrell, who was imprisoned as a teenager for a murder he did not commit. And it came about, and I really don't, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to take the credit, because it was really the Associated Press. There are really a number of layers to how he ended up being freed after being in prison for longer than he had been alive. but I had moderated a presidential debate, my first ever, tons of nerves, tons of anxiety, tons of prayer that got me through that night of probably my biggest anxiety of my life. But August of 2019, I asked Senator Amy Klobuchar, who had been the district attorney in Minnesota when Mayan Burrell was put away. And I asked her about, there were some questions from the local NAACP about her fairness racially, right? And so she, on the stage that night, talked about how she went after the murderer of this little black girl who had been shot while sitting at her dining room table, stray bullet kills her, and how she put the person behind bars for that. Associated Press ends up doing an in-depth report, finds out that Mayan Burrell really wasn't guilty of that crime. We then go and do a jailhouse interview, and fast forward, he is now a free man today. And so when you look at just on an individual level of actually having impact of that in some even small way, if my reporting or my question ended up, producing this result of getting this man who was unfairly incarcerated for decades out, to be free, that's really significant, and I feel like, wow, that we're making a difference. Just recently, just this week, we did a story after several months of investigation into LA County Probation Department of primarily, we're talking about black and brown girls who, there are now nearly 3,000 who've come forward, who are women at this point, who've talked about how for decades in juvenile detention by LA County probation officers and supervisors, they were raped, molested, sexually abused, turned a blind eye. Now, this is tantamount when we're talking about the sheer numbers, the amount of time that went along to the Catholic Church, to the Boy Scouts, to the gymnasts with Larry Nassar. And when those victims came forward, people listened, people reacted. But when you had primarily, you're talking about black and brown girls who were considered, they're juvies, they've done something bad, they were not listened to. And so I asked one of the young ladies, we interviewed 3 of them who are a part of this class action lawsuit, and I said, what does justice look like for you? And she said, this is justice. You all are shining a light on what happened to us. And that is, people I think often are awestruck by the big name celebrities that I get to sit down with, and there's a place for that as well. But the stories that I really feel like we made a difference often are not, part of the A-list celebrities. It's the people who otherwise, the press decided, their story isn't worthwhile. And that's where I do feel like I can make a difference and say, no, that we're going to tell this story, that no one else is interested. And that is where I feel satisfied and gratified by what I get to do.
And I have to point to your Christian worldview because that's redemptive. And when you could make a difference by redeeming something that is lost or thrown away, I could talk to you for the next 6 hours.
We're just getting started.
You're fantastic. And I hope you're willing to come back to the program.
Of course. So if you'll have me back, Pastor.
We can talk some more. That's fantastic. I've got to wrap it up. Okay. And we didn't get to talk about Girls of the World, which we have showcased here. This is your latest book, right?
Latest book, yes.
Okay. So I have a good reason to have you come back on the program.
Come back and talk about the book.
Talk about it.
Yes.
Well, I know you're upset because I am. The clock is dictating to us that we've got to bring it to a close. So thanks for coming on the show. And, of course, thank you, Linsey Davis.
For having me.
And we're proud of you.
Oh.
You represent us as a faith and as a community of color in ways that we want to be represented.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. And I really appreciate you, our audience, for joining us. And, of course, as a journalist, I know it's not always easy to break away from busy schedules. So we're grateful again to have Linsey with us. And know that you, our listeners, tuning in will always experience something special here on the A.R. Bernard Show. And if you like what you heard, please like, comment, and subscribe. We'll be back soon with another incredible guest. And until next time, God bless.